The stagecoach rattled like a dying man's last breath, each jolt sending Eliora Gracewood's spine crashing against the hard wooden seat. Outside, the sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise, purple and swollen with unshed rain. Ellie pressed her palm flat against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she traced the first fat drops splattering against it. 3 more hours to Mossrich. The thought should have comforted her. 3 more hours and she would meet the man she was to marry, Winslow Harlow, the shopkeeper with tidy handwriting and a promise of stability in his letters. 3 more hours and she could leave behind the shame of her father's ruined reputation, the whispers that had chased her out of Philadelphia. But the storm had other plans. A crack of lightning split the sky, so close the air smelled of burnt metal. The horses screamed. The coach lurched violently to the side, and for one heart-stopping moment, Ellie was weightless. Then the world slammed back into her as the stagecoach flipped. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Ellie's body was thrown like a rag doll, her shoulder striking something hard before she landed in a heap of petticoats and pain. Silence. Then, groaning metal. The panicked shriek of a horse. The relentless drum of rain. Ellie dragged herself upright, her vision swimming. The stagecoach lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily. The driver was gone, likely thrown clear. The other passenger, an elderly woman who had spoken of visiting her grandchildren, lay motionless, her neck bent at an unnatural angle. Ellie scrambled back, bow rising in her throat. She was alone. And the bridge was out. Not just damaged, gone. The wooden planks had collapsed into the raging river below, leaving only twisted skeletal remains. Sabotage? An accident? Ellie's mind raced, but the how didn't matter now. The where did. She was in the middle of nowhere, with a storm howling around her, no shelter, and a dress soaked through to the skin. Then she saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. A cabin? Ellie stumbled forward, her boots sinking into the mud. Every step sent knives of pain up her ankle, but she clenched her teeth and kept moving. The light grew brighter, guiding her like a beacon. By the time she reached the porch, her vision was tunneling. She barely managed to lift a hand before her knees gave out. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the door swinging open, and the shadowed outline of a man taller than any she'd ever met. Ellie woke to the scent of cedar and something earthy, sage maybe or thyme. The bed beneath her was firm, the blankets rough but warm. For a blissful moment she forgot the storm, the crash, the terror. Then she saw him. The man sat in a chair across the room, whittling a piece of wood with a knife longer than her hand. He didn't look up as she stirred, but his hands stilled. "You're awake." His voice was like gravel dragged over stone, low, rough, and utterly devoid of welcome. Ellie pushed herself up, wincing as her shoulder protested. "Where am I?" "My cabin." He still didn't look at her. "You collapsed on my porch last night." "Last night?" Ellie's stomach dropped. She'd been unconscious for hours? "The stagecoach crashed." "I know. Found the wreckage when I went looking for my dog." As if summoned, a massive gray wolf dog lifted its head from where it lay by the hearth. Its golden eyes locked onto Ellie, assessing. She swallowed hard. The others? Dead. The word was a hammer blow. Ellie's hands fisted in the blanket. Winslow would think she'd abandoned him. Or worse, that she died. The man finally looked up and Ellie's breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, but his face was etched with lines that spoke of hard years. His hair, dark as wet bark, was tied back, but a few strands had escaped, framing a jaw sharp enough to cut stone. And his eyes, like winter frost over a forgotten grave, cold, isolated. "You'll stay until you can walk," he said, as if dictating terms to a stray animal. "Then you'll go." Ellie bristled. "I didn't ask for your charity." "No. But you needed it." He stood, unfolding to a height that made the cabin feel suddenly smaller. "I'm Theron Darrow." "You are?" "Eliora Gracewood." She lifted her chin. "And I was on my way to Mossridge to be married." Something flickered in his gaze, too fast to name. "Not anymore." Ellie opened her mouth to argue, but Theren was already striding toward the door. "Rest," he said without turning. "Psalm will watch you." The wolf dog's ears pricked at its name. And then Ellie was alone, with only the crackling fire, a beast that could probably tear out her throat, and the unsettling sense that Theron Darrow was a man who carried his own storm inside him. The morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, painting the rough-hewn wooden floor in pale gold. Ellie sat up slowly, testing her weight on her injured ankle. The swelling had gone down, but a dull ache still pulsed with every movement. She glanced around the sparse room, a table cluttered with dried herbs, a shelf of leather-bound books, and in the corner, a small wooden cross nailed to the wall. Theren was nowhere to be seen. Psalm, the wolf dog, lifted its head from where it lay near the hearth, watching her with unervingly intelligent eyes. Ellie hesitated, then reached out a hand. "You won't bite me, will you?" The dog huffed as if insulted. Ellie smiled faintly and stood, limping toward the table. The herbs were neatly labeled in a delicate, looping script. Lavender for sleep, chamomile for nerves, yarrow for wounds. But beneath them lay a leather-bound journal, its pages slightly yellowed with age. Ellie ran her fingers over the cover, then froze. The title was written in French. Journal de Plantes Medicinales. Her breath caught. French. Her mother's language. The one she had whispered to Ellie as a child, the one she had used to teach her the names of flowers before the fever took her. Without thinking, Ellie flipped open the journal and froze. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, sketches of plants and remedies. But in the margins someone had written letters, tiny coded messages. Ellie's pulse quickened. She knew this cipher. Her father had used it in his botanical research. The door creaked open. Theren stood in the doorway, his arms laden with firewood, his expression darkening as his gaze landed on the journal in her hands. For a heartbeat, neither moved. "Then, put that down." His voice was low, dangerous. Ellie didn't flinch. "This is your wife's?" Theron's jaw tightened. He dropped the firewood with a thud, sending Psalm darting out of the way. "You shouldn't touch what isn't yours." "I can read it." Silence. Theren went very still. "What?" "It's written in French. And the notes in the margins, they're in a cipher my father used." Ellie traced the faded ink. She was documenting something important. Something hidden. Theren crossed the room in 3 strides, snatching the journal from her hands. "You're lying." "I'm not." Ellie held his gaze. "I can translate it for you." For the first time, something flickered in Theron's eyes, not anger but something raw. Vulnerable. "Why would you do that?" "Because I owe you my life," Ellie said simply. "And because I have nowhere else to go." Theren stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. "Fine. You translate the journal. I'll let you stay until the snow melts." Ellie nodded. "Deal." But as Theren turned away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the journal held more than just remedies. It held secrets. And secrets, in her experience, were always dangerous. The fever came on suddenly. One moment, Theren was sharpening his hunting knife by the fire. The next he swayed, his face ashen. Ellie barely caught him before he hit the floor. "You're burning up," she said, pressing a hand to his forehead. Theren batted her away weakly. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Ellie dragged him to the bed, her muscles straining under his weight. "When did this start?" Theren didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, his skin slick with sweat. Ellie yanked back his sleeve and froze. A deep gash ran along his forearm, the edges red and swollen. "Infection." Ellie cursed under her breath. She grabbed the journal, flipping frantically through the pages. There had to be something. Pour les plaies infecties. She scanned the instructions, then set to work. Boiling water. Crushed yarrow. Honey from the jar on the shelf. Theren watched her through half-lidded eyes as she cleaned the wound, his breath hissing between his teeth. "Hold still," Ellie muttered. Theron's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "Why are you doing this?" Ellie met his gaze. "Because you saved me." Theron's grip tightened, then loosened. His fingers slid away, leaving her skin tingling. Ellie bandaged the wound, then pressed a cup of willow bark tea to his lips. "Drink." Theren obeyed, his eyes never leaving her face. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling fire. "Then, you remind me of her." Ellie stilled. "Your wife." Theron's voice was barely a whisper. She was a healer too. Ellie didn't know what to say. So she simply sat beside him, watching as the fever finally pulled him under. And in the quiet of the cabin, with the storm raging outside, she wondered if Theron Darrow was more than just a wounded man. He was a man who still loved. And that made him dangerous in ways she hadn't expected. The first snow fell softly, dusting the forest in a hush of white. Ellie stood at the cabin's window, watching the flakes spiral down from the iron-gray sky. Behind her, Theren moved quietly, packing supplies into a worn leather satchel. Dried meat, a water skin, a bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. "We need salt," he said without looking up. "And flour if Harlow's store hasn't run out." Ellie stiffened at the mention of Mossridge. "Of Winslow." "You're letting me go with you?" Theron's hands paused. You know the cipher. If we find more of her notes in town, you'll need to read them. A practical reason. Of course. Ellie exhaled, her breath fogging the glass. What if someone recognizes me? Theren finally met her gaze. His fever had broken 2 days prior, but shadows still lingered beneath his eyes. Then you'll have a choice to make. The trail to Moss Ridge was treacherous with ice. Ellie walked beside Theren, her boots crunching through the brittle crust of snow. Psalm ranged ahead, his nose to the ground, his tail a silent flag of warning. You never told me her name, Ellie said suddenly. Theren didn't slow. Claire. Claire. A gentle name. Ellie pictured her, dark-haired like Theren perhaps, with clever fingers and a quiet laugh. How did she die? A muscle jumped in Theron's jaw. Fire. The word was a blade. Ellie swallowed her next question. Moss Ridge was smaller than she'd imagined, a handful of log buildings clustered around a muddy square. A few townsfolk glanced their way as they entered, their eyes lingering on Theron's scarred hands, on Ellie's too-fine dress. Harlow's Mercantile stood at the center of town, its windows fogged with condensation. Ellie's pulse thundered as Theren pushed open the door. The shop was empty save for a plump woman behind the counter. She looked up, her smile fading as she saw Theron. Darrow. Heard you were dead. Theren ignored her. Salt. Flour. Coffee if you have it. The woman's gaze slid to Ellie. Who's this? Ellie opened her mouth. My wife. The lie stunned her silent. The woman's eyebrows shot up. Didn't know you remarried. Theron's voice was ice. You don't know a lot of things. The woman pursed her lips but began gathering the supplies. Ellie busied herself examining a shelf of tinctures, and froze. There, between a bottle of laudanum and a jar of leeches, was a small brown vial labeled in that same delicate script. Pour la douleur. For pain. Claire's handwriting. Ellie snatched it up just as the shop's back door opened, and Winslow Harlow stepped through. Winslow was taller than Ellie remembered. Broader. His blonde hair was neatly combed, his hands clean, hands that had never known hard labor. He stopped short at the sight of her, his blue eyes widening. Eliora? Ellie's fingers tightened around the vial. Hello, Winslow. A beat of silence. Then Winslow smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. We thought you were dead. As you can see, I'm not. Theren stepped forward, his bulk a silent barrier between them. You're the shopkeeper? Winslow's gaze flicked to him, assessing. And you are. Her husband. Winslow's smile turned brittle. Funny. She was supposed to marry me. The air in the shop thickened. The plump woman, clearly Winslow's new bride, gasped. Theren didn't move, but Ellie saw the way his fingers twitched toward the knife at his belt. Ellie forced herself to breathe. Things change. Winslow's eyes darkened. Indeed they do. He reached for the vial in her hand. That's not for sale. Ellie held it tighter. Why do you have it? A gift from a friend. Winslow's voice was smooth. A woman named Claire Darrow. Theren went rigid. Ellie's blood turned to ice. You knew her? Winslow's smile was a razor. Oh, we all knew Claire. Didn't we, Darrow? Theren moved. One moment he was beside Ellie, the next he had Winslow pinned against the wall, his forearm braced against the other man's throat. Say her name again, Theren growled. I dare you. Winslow choked, his face purpling. The shopkeeper screamed. Psalm snarled, his hackles raised. Ellie grabbed Theron's arm. Stop. You'll kill him. Theren didn't loosen his grip. That's the idea. And then what? Ellie hissed. You hang? For him? Something in her voice must have reached him. Theren stepped back, releasing Winslow with a shove. The shopkeeper collapsed, gasping. Winslow rubbed his throat, his eyes blazing. She was looking for you, Darrow? Before she died. Begging for help. Theren flinched as if struck. Ellie grabbed the supplies and shoved them into Theron's arms. We're leaving. Winslow's laughter followed them out the door. She burned alive, Darrow? Just like your daughter. Theren froze. Then he turned, slowly, deliberately, and looked at Winslow with a gaze so full of murder that the other man paled. This isn't over, Theren said softly. And Ellie knew with a sick certainty that it wasn't. The snow had turned to sleet by the time they left Moss Ridge, needling against Ellie's cheeks like tiny knives. Theren walked ahead of her, his shoulders rigid, his silence a living thing between them. Psalm trailed behind, whining low in his throat. Ellie clutched the vial in her pocket, the glass cold against her fingers. Pour la douleur. Claire's handwriting. Winslow's sneering voice. She burned alive. She couldn't stand it anymore. Theren. He didn't stop. Ellie grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. Tell me what happened. His eyes were black in the fading light. You heard Harlow. She burned. That's not an answer. Ellie's voice cracked. Why was Claire in Mossridge? Why did she leave you? Theron's breath came hard, his chest rising and falling like a cornered animal's. She didn't leave. I sent her away. The words landed like a blow. The fever took our daughter first, Theren said, his voice hollow. Claire couldn't bear it. She begged me to take her to town to find medicine. But his hands clenched. I was too late. The fire started in the church. By the time I got there. Ellie's throat tightened. Winslow was there? Theron's jaw worked. He sold her the poison. A chill slithered down Ellie's spine. The vial. Theren nodded. She thought it would ease our daughter's pain. But it wasn't medicine. His voice dropped to a whisper. It was oil. For the lamps. Ellie's stomach turned. You think he? I think he knew exactly what would happen when she lit it. Theron's gaze burned into hers. And now he has you. The storm broke with a vengeance that night, howling around the cabin like a living thing. Ellie paced the small space, her mind racing. Theren sat at the table, sharpening his knife with methodical strokes. We should go to the sheriff, Ellie said. Theron's knife stilled. Harlow's uncle. Of course. Ellie cursed under her breath. Then we leave. Tonight. Theren looked up, his eyes glinting in the firelight. And let him win? This isn't about winning. Ellie's voice rose. It's about surviving. Theren stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand. He'll come for you. Not because of Claire, because of your father. Ellie froze. What? The cipher. The plants. Theren stepped closer. Harlow didn't want Claire for her remedies. He wanted her knowledge. Just like he wants yours. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Her father's stolen research. The coded notes. Winslow's interest in the vial. Ellie's legs gave out. She sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. All this time, you were protecting me. Theren knelt before her, his voice raw. I won't fail again. Outside the wind screamed. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch snapped. Psalm growled. Theron's head whipped toward the door. They're here. The wind screamed through the trees like a living thing, tearing at the cabin's shutters with icy claws. Ellie stood frozen in the darkness, her breath coming in ragged gasps as Psalm's growl reverberated through the floorboards. Theren moved like a shadow, his calloused hands extinguishing the lantern with a hiss of oil, plunging them into a darkness so thick Ellie could taste it, smoky and metallic like fear. They're here. The words hung between them, heavier than the hunting knife in Theron's grip. Outside, branches snapped. Leather creaked. Men's voices, low and rough, carried on the wind. Too many. Ellie's fingers found the iron poker by the hearth, still warm from the fire, as the first blow landed against the door. The oak splintered. Darrow. Winslow's voice slithered through the gap. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Theren didn't speak. He pressed a hand to Ellie's back, steering her toward the root cellar, but she shook her head. She wouldn't hide. Not while he fought. The second blow shattered the latch. Ellie acted. She snatched Claire's journal from the table and hurled it into the flames. Pages blackened, ink vanishing in a curl of smoke. Winslow's scream of rage was drowned by Theron's roar as he flipped the heavy oak table, barricading the door. Too late. The door burst inward. Men poured inside, 5, 6, their faces masked with scarves, their hands clutching clubs and rope. Winslow stood framed in the wreckage, his fine coat dusted with snow, his smile a knife in the dim light. His gaze locked on the burning journal. You stupid girl, he whispered. Then chaos erupted. Theren moved like a storm. His knife flashed, slicing through rope as a noose flew toward him. He ducked a swinging club, driving his shoulder into a man's gut, sending him crashing into the wall. Psalm lunged, his fangs sinking into a thigh, blood spraying across the floorboards. Ellie swung the poker. It connected with a sickening thud against a man's wrist. Bone crunched. He howled, clutching his arm, but another grabbed her from behind, thick arms squeezing the air from her lungs. She kicked back, her boot connecting with his shin, and twisted free just as Theron's knife buried itself in the man's shoulder. Winslow lunged for her. Theren tackled him. They crashed through the ruined door and into the storm, rolling across the frozen ground. Winslow's fist connected with Theron's jaw, once, twice, but Theren barely flinched. He grabbed Winslow by the collar and slammed his head into the icy earth. The man went still. Panting, Theren staggered to his feet, just as a figure emerged from the trees. Lysander Holt. The land baron's bear-like frame blocked the moonlight, his meaty hands flexing around a rusted axe. Should have stayed gone, Darrow? Theren wiped blood from his mouth. You first. Holt charged. Theren dodged, but Holt pivoted, swinging the axe toward Ellie. What? Psalm's jaws closed around Holt's arm. The man bellowed, shaking the wolf dog loose, but Theren was already moving. He grabbed Holt's wrist, twisting until tendons popped. The axe fell. Theren drove his knee into Holt's gut, then his fist into Holt's nose. Crack. Holt dropped like a felled tree. Silence. Then, a whistle of rope through air. Theren jerked back, but not fast enough. The lasso caught his ankle, yanking him off balance. One of Holt's men pulled hard, dragging Theren through the snow. Another raised a club. Ellie didn't think. She sprinted, leaping onto the man's back, her fingers clawing at his eyes. He howled, stumbling, and Theren twisted free, driving his elbow into the man's throat. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Theron's knife glinting. Enough. The shout froze them all. Sheriff Boyd stood at the tree line, a dozen townsfolk behind him, holding torches, pitchforks, their faces hard. Ellie's heart stopped. Then, we heard the fight. The sheriff's gaze swept over the wreckage. Holt unconscious, Winslow groaning, Theren bleeding but upright. His lips thinned. Harlow's been stealing land deeds. Burning out homesteaders. We've got proof now. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Theren swayed. Ellie caught him, her arms wrapping around his waist, his blood hot against her fingers. You're hurt, she whispered. He leaned into her, his breath warm on her temple. Worth it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, the kind of spring day that made Ellie wonder if God himself had painted the sky just for them. She stood in front of the small mirror in their rebuilt cabin. Their cabin now, adjusting the simple lace collar of her dress. The fabric was faded but clean, the blue calico reminding her of the wildflowers that had begun pushing through the thawed earth. A knock at the door. You decent. Marigold Pike's voice carried through the wood, warm as the honey she'd brought as a wedding gift. Ellie smoothed her skirts. Come in. The door creaked open, revealing Marigold's round face, her gray-streaked hair pinned neatly under a bonnet. In her arms, she carried a small bundle of pink-throated trilliums, the first wildflowers of spring. Found these by the creek, Marigold said, her eyes glistening. Same spot where Claire used to pick them. Ellie's fingers trembled as she took the flowers. The stems were cool and slightly damp, their petals trembling like the wings of a moth. She hadn't known, hadn't realized Theren had shown Marigold the place. Marigold seemed to understand. She cupped Ellie's cheek, her palm rough from decades of midwifery. He's different with you, child. Lets the light in. The church smelled of fresh-cut pine and beeswax. Every pew was filled, not just with the curious but with people whose lives Ellie and Theren had touched. The Millers, whose son Theren had pulled from the icy river. Old Man Turner, who Ellie had treated for lung fever. Even Sheriff Boyd sat stiffly in the back, his badge polished for the occasion. When the door opened, every head turned. Theren stood at the end of the aisle, his broad shoulders straining the seams of Ephraim Caldwell's borrowed black coat. His hair was still damp from the river, combed back to reveal the scar along his temple, a mark Ellie now traced with her lips each night. Psalm sat obediently at his side, a wreath of mountain laurel around his neck. Then the music began, a fiddle and harmonica playing Be Thou My Vision, and Ellie stepped forward on her father's arm. Ephraim squeezed her hand. Ready, little bird? She wasn't. Her knees threatened to buckle. But then she saw Theren, really saw him. The way his breath caught when their eyes met. The way his fingers, usually so sure, fumbled with the simple gold band he'd forged himself. The way his lips moved silently along with the hymn's words, as if remembering a prayer long forgotten. And suddenly she was floating down the aisle. The ceremony passed in a blur, scripture readings, vows whispered too low for anyone else to hear, Theron's large hands cradling hers as though she were something precious. But when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the entire church held its breath. Theren hesitated. Then, with a reverence that brought tears to Marigold's eyes, he lifted Ellie's hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, right over the scar from the stagecoach crash. A promise. A benediction. The congregation erupted into cheers. Later, beneath the apple tree they'd planted together, one young sapling between two weathered crosses, Theren pulled Ellie close. The celebration still raged inside the church, laughter and fiddle music spilling into the twilight. You kept your promise? He murmured against her hair. Ellie smiled up at him. Which one? The one where you said you'd make me laugh again. He brushed his thumb over her cheekbone. Took you long enough. She swatted his chest, but he caught her hand, pressing it over his heart. The steady beat beneath her palm was a miracle. This man who'd survived fire and ice and his own despair, still standing. Still hers. From the church steps Marigold called, "Come cut the cake before Psalm gets to it." Theren groaned but didn't let go. "Ready?" Ellie looked around, at the garden bursting with herbs, at the sturdy cabin with its new addition for the orphans they'd begun fostering, at the wildflowers nodding in the breeze. "Ready," she said. And hand in hand they walked toward the light. Did Ellie and Theron's journey of faith, love and redemption touch your heart? So, smash that like button to let me know you love this story. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an uplifting Christian romance. Share this video with a friend who needs hope, or anyone who loves clean, emotional love stories. Comment below, what was your favorite moment? The journal burning scene? Theron's knuckle kiss at the wedding? Psalm the wolf dog's heroic attack?